Okay. So basically, if you see the relationship, this is the like one to many written, and this is the other many to one. If you see the relationship, like in one to many, we are using the mapped by cart. So cart is the column between in another table, another. So here cart is the column. That's fine. Like whatever the written inside mapped by will be the column inside this. Now, in case of the many to one, in this part, why they are writing this basically? Because this join to many. Now, this here it is the many. So one cart can have the many items, but each item will be having a cart ID inside it. So similarly, what I mean to say is, like one class can have the many students, but every student have a particular class ID. So same way it is writing here, like that particular student will be mapped with which. So one student will be having a particular class ID. So one class having the multiple student. So there will write like one to many. One class have multiple students. So one to many. But when we'll write the opposite things, like one student have the only one class, one student can have the only one class, and that will be the unique class ID. So like one to many is fine, but in case of the many to one, we can take the only one field from the class, and that is the class ID. So we'll be joining that for each of the student. Each student, his class name is their class name is mapped with them basically. Like class, if any student is there, so class ID is mapped with it. Like he is a eighth student class or fifth student class. So that particular number, that ID number is mapped. So in our case, what I mean to say is here one to many is fine. With this classroom, we are having the one variable classroom, like private classroom. This is fine. Now here what we should put name equal to in the join column is like each student. This is the student. Basically here I am taking the student class because some year wise will happen. So in year wise we have to maintain the classes. So it's not always like one student, I mean one class will be mapping with the one class. Sorry, I mean to say is one classroom will be mapped with the multiple student class session on the basis of the years. So for 1 year, one student class session will be there. Next year, that student class session will change. So because of that, combining the both details together, we are using the student class. Now here, basically, I mean to say is here we need to have the classroom number, a classroom ID basically. So classroom ID or class ID, I need to basically each student will be mapped with a class ID. So this is the student class, and each student have the classroom, and that classroom ID will be mapped. So here which ID I'm taking? This ID. Okay. So mapped with the, I need to rename this also as a class ID so that it will be easy to understand. I'll write here class ID or classroom ID. Both are fine. So to summarize it one more time, I was writing here in diagram. Okay, that's fine. So now, like, are you guys understanding like why we are taking this join column? This join column is for identification purpose. Like each student will be having a class. So to make the relationship between the student and the class, we are taking this class ID. It's a little confusing, but like whenever you relate the code, then you can understand. Basic example is here. Like this is one to many, and many to one is this one. So let me make it smaller little bit. So here the use case is one cart can have the multiple items. One cart, and inside that cart multiple items can be there. So they have taken this use case. So similarly, we are taking like one class can have the multiple student classes. So that we have to relate basically from these examples. So we are writing one to many. This field is mapping here in many to one other table basically. And here many to one we are not writing mapped by, we are writing the join column, like with which field it will be mapped. So in our case it is the not cart ID, in our case it is the class ID basically. Okay, so this mapping we have done, and now it should not be null. Update we can take, update, I'm removing this. So now I'll delete these things. Okay. So now we have the relationship between these two tables. Now student class, what fields we should have? So that we have already written here for student class. Student class will be having the student class ID, admission date, admission status. So these are all fields I need to write now. So this is the relationship between the class and student class. Okay. What should be our next step once like mapping is done? This mapping we have done now. Now second mapping will be a student to the this is the class to the student class, and then there will be mapping to the student to the student class. We are having class ID, roll number. Okay. So we also know like a single student can be into the multiple classes in a different years. So for that relationship, to maintain that relationship, one student can have the multiple classes in the different years. Yeah. So for that, one student will be having the multiple class. Okay. So here, private list of the student class. We are taking a student class. This there is no basic initial requirement for this student class, but to maintain the year-wise data, we are taking the student class table. We can also write directly like class. One class can have the multiple student, and the one student will be having the one class. That we can do, but to maintain the data year-wise, like one student for the different year, it can be the multiple classes. So for that, to maintain the year-wise record, like someone, if you want to see the past details of that student, like from how many years that student is there in that school. So to get those kind of the details, we have to store the previous year data also. For that purpose, we are taking the student class table. So one student will be having the list of the student classes. Student classes. Here also, like one student will be there. So one and multiple student class. So one too many we have to write. And then in with one too many annotation, we are using mapped by concept. Mapped by double quotes. We'll use the cascade all. Cascade equal to in curly bracket cascade type dot all. Hello, am I audible?